What's up? Here we go. So we are in domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia. So you can look back at the back wall if you want, and you can see that the string is growing. We have one thing on it, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's called Porifera. So a couple things. So we actually are starting a lesson in SpongeBob SquarePants. So if you've never seen SpongeBob SquarePants, it's still going to be relevant, obviously, but if you have seen it, it's going to be way funnier. So you can see Patrick and SpongeBob, Gary, Mr. Krabs, and of course, Squidward. So we are starting just with a general information slide about all invertebrates. And recall that the word invertebrate means having no backbone. So these organisms are all squiggly wiggly, loosey goosey, just like a worm. Okay, so these are animals that do not have a backbone or a spine. They are invertebrates. So you're going to talk about a bunch of different phyla: sponges, cnidaria, worms, mollusks, arthropods, and echinoderms. And these words might sound only just a little bit familiar because on that pre-assessment thing that we did where you rated yourself 1 through 4, I said a lot of these words. So we're going to start today with the most simple one, and that's first on the list. So we are starting with sponges today. So the fancy word for sponges is going to be called porifera. So if I slow down that word, porifera, it makes sense because SpongeBob has pores. Okay, so these guys are asymmetrical. So hopefully you know that that word means having no symmetry because the prefix a means not or no. So these guys are not symmetrical. They are heterotrophic. That word should immediately be known in your head. Heterotrophic means they need to eat. So the little sponge that is sitting back behind my desk or up front, depending on if I moved it or not, actually eats. Just like you. It has kind of a mouth part, and food goes into it. It'll digest it, and eventually it will release feces or poop. They have cells, but no tissues, organs, or organ systems. So when we're talking about sponges, it is just a bunch of cells that live together. They don't have cardio tissue. They don't have a heart. They don't have nervous tissue. They don't have a brain. It's just a bunch of cells that work together. Adult sponges do stay in one place, so baby sponges have the ability to kind of swim or float around until they find somewhere that's good and safe to land. Once they get stuck there, just like a coral reef, it does stay stuck. So the adult sponge stays in one place. If you look at my sponge, it's either up front or behind my desk. Go ahead and ask me. You can see that the bottom is actually very flat. That's because that's where it would have been stuck to the bottom of the ocean. And then I kind of already said this one. Porifera means pore bearer. So these guys have pores. So I know I keep talking about that sponge. So look at the sponge that I have on my desk. You can see pores. Think about your nose, okay? You might have some blackheads on your nose. Those are all pores too. They're little holes. So sponges have a lot of little holes. Think of SpongeBob, okay? He's full of them. So they are the simplest aquatic or water animal. Okay, they are animals, so they are related to us. Remember these two words. Diffusion and osmosis help maintain homeostasis. So we have a lot to break down on this little bullet point. So diffusion means the movement of molecules. So this is going to be the movement of food, the movement of poop, the movement of oxygen, because sponges need to breathe. Osmosis is the movement of water right here. So it lives in water, but it needs to be able to move that water around, kind of like sharks. They need to be able to swim in order to breathe. Sponges need to move water through themselves so that it can eat. And homeostasis means, remember, not sick, because homeostasis means stable internal conditions, and that word spells sick. So they're not sick. There is an opening at the tops where water flows out, but no hole at the bottom. So I know I keep saying it, but again, look at the sponge. Please get your hands on the sponge at some point today. You need to look and see that there are tubes. There are little, it looks like kind of little straws. That's where food's moving around in there. Flagella, just like in bacteria, that's going to be a tail or a long whip. It's going to help water move through the sponge. So the little tails, think about if you've ever made a whirlpool in a pool. all your friends and your buddies, you swim around in a circle. You're using your legs to push yourself through the water. A flagella is going to do the same job. The flagella is going to whip back and forth, just like your legs, and it's going to move the water. They have a skeleton that is made of spicules. So you can feel the sponge, please don't break it, but it's pretty tough. I mean, you can't really go up to it. It's not like the sponge that you do your dishes with. That one's very soft because it's man-made. But the sponges in nature, they need to be able to stand upright. You see the sponges down in this picture. They're all shining up towards the sunlight. That's just a coincidence. But they do this with their little skeleton called spicules. They do reproduce asexually via budding. So let's break down these two words. Asexually, there's that prefix A again. A stands for not or means not. So it's not sexual. Budding, we've heard that word before. Pop quiz in your head. Let's see if you can tell me what organism does budding. If you guessed yeast, you're right. Yeast does budding, but now sponges do budding as well. So remember, that's when a little tumor grows, and eventually it gets so big that it pops off and it makes a new organism. So they're going to do the same way. They do reproduce sexually sometimes, though, as well. They're going to release their gametes into the water. Remember, gametes are egg or sperm. So what they're going to do, I know everyone keeps waiting for the minute that I say they're going to have sex. They're not. What they're going to do is they're going to release their eggs or their sperm into the water. The water's going to move around the eggs and the sperm, and hopefully a sperm finds an egg. Okay, so it's kind of like a crapshoot if you're going to get a baby or not, because once the sperm or egg leaves the sponge, you don't know what happens, or they don't know what happens. So sponges mostly are male and female. This sponge here is a male. You can see his white cloud of sperm puffing out of him. And then the eggs, they actually would come out of the sides of the sponge. So down here, it will alternate from year to year depending on temperature. So depending on the climate and all that stuff, sponges might actually change genders from year to year. So sponges are filter feeders, which means they pull water into themselves and they extract the food particles out of the water. So I know you all know that I love Oreos and I do my exercise, my bicep curls, but I love mac and cheese as well. So think through making mac and cheese with me. Step 1 is to boil some water. Step 2 is to pour the macaroni and cheese down in it. Step 3 is to let it cook for 7 to 8 minutes. Step 4, what do I have to do next? I have to take the water and the macaroni. I have to go to the sink and I have to use a strainer to get rid of all the water, and it's going to catch all of the food. And then I have to go back to the pot, pour it back in. I put in a little milk, a little butter, and the cheese powder, and then I eat it after I put some hot sauce on it. So filter feeding is just like making mac and cheese. You're going to strain out the noodles and get rid of the water. You don't want to keep the water. The sponges don't want to keep the water either, otherwise we'd have mac and cheese soup, which sounds delicious. You want just the food. So filter feeding is like taking a strainer and grabbing just the macaroni out of the water. Okay, so what they eat is bacteria, protozoa, algae, all of these words you should have heard before. I know you know all of them. Bacteria are indomain bacteria. Protozoa is a protist. And then algae is going to be either a plant or a protist, depending on what color it is. So in this GIF up here, you're going to actually watch the whole video here in a second. This hand, he sprayed some green dye down here on the bases. And the flagella are pushing the water up through the tubes. Remember I said the flagella, they kick the water just like you do in a pool. They're kicking the water up through the tubes. That's how they eat. So once the water comes out of here, they have strained all of their food out of it. So you're going to watch the full video here in a second. So I'm finished teaching you, so you need to look at the front board or go back to Google Classroom, figure out what you need to do next. Please keep working.